Wouldn't it be great if you could find your shows all in one place?
Find my favorites.
Get Xfinity Stream Saver with Netflix, Apple TV Plus, and Peacock included for only $15 a month.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity, alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from Raymond James Stadium, getting set for the Eagles game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. EJ, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Olivia. This really is starting to feel like a home away from home for us. If I was smart, I would have considered buying maybe a rental property or something down here a couple of years ago, because we're here enough where I think it would have maybe given me some return on investment. But no, I'm excited for the game, and honestly, a little bit excited for the bye week if I'm being totally honest with our viewers. So yeah, no, for sure, excited for the show.
I think the Eagles are also excited for the bye week, given how the injuries have all played out to start this season. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, as a reminder, you can be a part of our conversation today. Head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. Leave us a comment, a question during the show or after the show, too. We'll be chatting with you guys throughout the game. We'd love to see you over there. But for now, let's get into some of those injuries, EJ. There's a whole lot of them to talk about. We'll start with the three big ones who are out for today's game on the Eagles. Lane Johnson, inactive today with a concussion. Same with A.J. Brown, dealing with a hamstring injury for the third straight week. Devontae Smith has also been ruled out of today's game with a concussion. I mean, those are three monumental players for the Eagles. But let's focus on Johnson in particular first. The Eagles' record is not great when he is not in the game. When he's playing, they are 91, 54-1. And then when he's not, 14-22. So not so great. Eagles have struggled in the passing game without him. If you look at the stats between the games that he is active versus the games that he is not, since Jalen Hurts has become the starter, their average yards per attempt in the passing game go down. Their pressure rate goes up. So all these things, not great for the Eagles offense. How do you think the Eagles are going to fare in his absence in today's game going up against this Bucs defense?
Yeah, they did pretty well after he went out against the Saints last week. But you're right. The long-term track record without Lane Johnson is what it is. And I think the reason that it's like that is really when you look at the way that the Eagles offense has been built, for honestly like a decade plus at this point. They are built around having two offensive tackles that can operate on an island, that can be, that can handle one-on-one matchups without very much help. When you think about Dallas Goedert's game that he had against the Saints, in part, he can have that game because he's not expected to chip. Edge rushers, basically assist the offensive tackles in their pass protection very often. Honestly, if you look at the contributions in the run game, that goes down to a lot to the offensive tackles being able to play at a high level without much help. But, again, like when you look at Lane Johnson's track record, what they've been able to do without him or with him, and then, the impact that it has when there is some, when he's out, it does kind of stand out as, a big problem for them. So, again, Fred Johnson played well, without Lane in the when Lane went out last week against the Saints. I think, there were some encouraging signs, but this is going to be the real test today. He's had the week of preparation. I really do think that that's going to be one of the things we're going to have to watch early in the game.
Absolutely. Let's hit on the inactives other than the players that we've already discussed today. Linebacker Devin White, he is out. The Eagles already ruled him out with for a personal reason going into today's game. Guard Trevor Keegan is out, which would indicate that Darian Kinnard is active, so he will be up sort of in relief along the offensive line, particularly at tackle there. And then defensive tackle Byron Young, inactive, quarterback Tanner McKee. So no really big surprises other than those big three. So yes, Eagles have their work cut out for them in the absence of Lane Johnson. And then, of course, without A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith, according to Next Gen Stats, has accounted for over 55% of the Eagles' intended air yards since week 2 when A.J. Brown was out of the lineup. So he has been a huge part of their offense. Dallas Goedert has kind of accounted for the rest of those air yards, more or less. And so now the Eagles are left with Dallas Goedert and a slew of depth receivers in Jahan Dotson, Johnny Wilson, Paris Campbell is one of the practice squad call-ups, and John Ross is the other. When you look at this group that Jalen Hurts has at his disposal in the passing game, how do you feel for the Eagles going into this game?
Yeah, just like I was saying a minute ago with Lane Johnson being like a foundational piece of how the Eagles offense is built and how it operates, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are, about as important, if not more important, to the passing game. I mean, the Eagles offense in the past has been built around guys being able to win one-on-one matchups, kind of like our guys are better than your guys under Nick Sirianni. And I think that's, something they're not going to be able to lean on today. It's going to be a real test for Kellen Moore's offensive structure, being able to, scheme guys open, get guys in space. They have talent, obviously, like Jahan Dotson, has been a productive player in the NFL before, but, it really is going to put the onus on Dallas Goedert, Jahan Dotson, just the group behind those guys to be able to make, contributions when their numbers are called. It's going to be a real challenge. And I think obviously it all really comes down to Jalen Hurts, his ability to, play within the structure of the offense and, kind of create when there are, maybe when things break down, being able to create, extend plays with his legs. So it's definitely a lot different than what it usually looks like with the Eagles offense without those two guys on the perimeter. It's going to change the dynamic of things. But, yeah, I still think, a lot of offenses would be pretty happy to have Saquon Barkley and Dallas Goedert as options, Jalen Hurts being able to kind of create after, out of structure as well. So I think there are avenues for the Eagles to score. But, again, I mean, this offense is built around having those guys on the outside. They're going to have to get creative to, account for the absences.
The Eagles are not the only team hurting right now. The Bucs are also down several key players, including defensive end Kalijah Kancey, safety Antoine Winfield Jr., and right tackle Luke Gedeke. Again, starters on Tampa Bay. Key players that they're going to miss. When you look at this list, who stands out to you, and where do you think the Eagles might be able to take advantage of some of the Bucs' weaknesses?
Yeah, I think Winfield Jr. is the one that stands out. I mean, he's an all-pro caliber player, and we've seen Jalen Hurts struggle the last couple of weeks and really throughout his career with, high-level safeties who can kind of manipulate things before and after the snap. We saw Tyrann Mathieu get the interception last week, kind of sitting on a route concept or, at least a route from Devontae Smith that was similar to one that they used the week before. So I think having, the Bucs being without that savvy, secondary member in terms of Antoine Winfield Jr., I think that's something that, stands out to me. I mean, Kalijah Kancey is another guy, though. I mean, I liked him coming out of the draft. He's, the Pittsburgh guy, like, pseudo local, I would say. So, yeah, I mean, they had a lot of guys on the injury report earlier this week. Obviously, they have the circumstances with Hurricane Helene. So I think that there's, been a lot for them to deal with this week. It's going to be interesting to see how they fare, going into this game.
Absolutely. All right, let's transition into the latest headlines for today's game and some of the big trends as well. I mean, looking back, it really hasn't been that long, EJ, as you mentioned earlier in our show, since the Eagles were last here. I think Eagles fans probably still have a pretty bad taste in their mouths the last time that the Eagles were here, losing to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 32-9 in the wild card round of the playoffs. And one of the big talking points coming out of that game was how Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense fared against the blitz. Hurts was blitzed on 69.2% of his dropbacks, and he completed 68% of those passes. And this season has been a little bit of a different story for Hurts against the blitz. He has shown some improvement. I don't think it's necessarily just him. I think he's got a lot more answers. We can talk about that. But he's only been blitzed on 31.9% of his dropbacks, which is a substantial drop-off compared to last season. And that on the dropbacks he is getting blitzed on, he has had a pretty good deal of success of completing those passes, 72.7% completion there. How prepared do you feel like the Eagles are this time around to face off against Todd Bowles and his formidable blitz, as we've all been discussing?
Yeah, I watched all of those dropbacks against the blitz earlier this week, and I think that you could look at it two different ways. You could either consider like the Eagles have done well against the blitz, so maybe teams are a little more reluctant to send big blitzes at them because they have shown that they have answers for them. But I also think when you compare last year's stats to this year's stats, what's missing is the two games against the New York Giants with Wink Martindale as their defensive coordinator last year and the two games that they played against Todd Bowles last year. So, those are coaches that are going to, send heavy pressure packages, a lot of exotic looks. I think that those games kind of skewed the numbers from last year. So I think that this game is going to be important because, they are facing Todd Bowles, who is going to send pressure, he sends pressure every week. It doesn't even matter if it's, somebody who's susceptible to it or not. He's always up toward the top of the NFL in terms of blitz percentage, blitz rate. So they're going to see a lot of pressure packages. They're going to see a lot of exotic looks. They've been okay. I'd say that there have been some encouraging signs in terms of how they've handled even big blitzes, especially, if a team sends 1 or 2 extra rushers, I think they've done very well with those. It's just having Jalen Hurts, he's got noticeably more hot answers against the blitz this year compared to last year. It's something that obviously they struggled with last year. But again, I think this is going to be the big test. After I watched all of those dropbacks, I think my main takeaway was it looks good so far, but we really the so far is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I think that the Todd Bowles matchup is one that we're going to be, obviously watching closely today because, he has a blitz package that is unlike most other defensive coaches.
It's been a small sample size so far, so we'll see how the offense fares today. Let's flip it over to the other side of the ball. The Eagles defense is going to have their work cut out for them going up against 2 of the top receivers, I guess, just in terms of receiving duos in the league, and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I mean, Godwin in particular has been really having a really strong season when lined up in the slot. He has totaled the league high in receptions and in yards when lined up in the slot this season. And conversely, the Eagles have really struggled in defending the slot. They're giving up 11.3 yards per attempt to opposing passers, targeting the slot, which is the second most in the league per NFL Next Gen stats. So Avonte Maddox, assuming he starts in the slot, is going to have his work cut out for him. Perhaps we'll see someone else. I don't know. EJ, what do you think? What is the key to slowing down Chris Godwin and Mike Evans today?
Yeah, it's a tricky matchup across the board. Darius Slay and Mike Evans have played against each other a lot. Darius Slay is, the type of veteran cornerback that you have on your team because you feel confident that he can, take that one-on-one matchup. But that said, Mike Evans is the type of receiver that has given Darius Slay trouble, during his Eagles tenure. He's a physical receiver. Darius Slay usually does well against the technicians, the route running guys. When it comes to like physical, bigger, big physical receivers, they can sometimes give him trouble. But I think you feel okay about that matchup. But then on the other side, like you said, how you handle Chris Godwin is an interesting thing for me. I think, we'll talk about it later in the show as well, how they might be able to match up. But yeah, Avonte Maddox has struggled at times in the slot. They've got, a rotation of guys that they could maybe turn to if that becomes a matchup problem. But yeah, and I think that's, like you said, I mean, Chris Godwin's in the slot about 60% of the time. They kind of have really leaned in to just making him like almost not a full-time slot guy, obviously, but more of the time. I think that's really where you can kind of take advantage of his strengths as a player. And, they've been doing a good job with it so far this year.
Absolutely. So that's not the only, matchup to keep an eye on the Eagles defense. I think a big talking point going into this game is also Jalen Carter and the success that he had last week against the New Orleans Saints. He recorded 4 pressures against the Saints, 1 hit and 3 hurries, but it just seems like every play he was involved or at least getting into the backfield in some capacity. So again, you look at today's game, this matchup for Carter could potentially be a positive one as well. The right guard, Cody Mauch, he's allowed 14 pressures from the right guard position, which is tied for the most this season, again, according to Next Gen Stats. So good numbers that could potentially work in Jalen Carter's favor. But I guess what is it going to take for him to continue to have consistent performances like the one that he had last week? It's a small sample size. It's 1 game, but in order for him to be able to replicate that week in and week out, what is it going to take?
Yeah, one thing I'm interested to see on that regard is like where he lines up and what fronts the Eagles use in this game. They used a lot of odd fronts against the Saints, and I do think it. It's pretty apparent. Like it unlocks something for that defensive line, and I'm curious. Obviously the Bucs are going to use a lot more 11 personnel, which is going to force the Eagles into nickel packages and dime packages more often. Usually you'd like to pair an even front, a 4-man front with those types of looks. But we've seen the Eagles in the past use like a 5-1 front in those nickel packages with 5 down linemen. I think that might be something that could help unlock Jalen Carter, in this game. I think he's more comfortable in those odd fronts. At least he's been more productive in those odd fronts throughout his career. And especially, this season, we've seen when he is in a 3-tech, it's been shaky at times. And then when he's, kind of a little bit further outside in like that 4-eye or 5 technique, he has been able to kind of, impose his will on games a little bit more. So honestly, I think whatever it takes to get that type of play from Jalen Carter, that's what they need to do, because you see what kind of impact he can have on a game. That Saints game, he really did wreck the game for most of the afternoon. I think, that's the ceiling for the Eagles defense is when Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Milton Williams, also when those guys are impacting the game and, kind of, having an impact on every single play, that's when I think this Eagles defense can really reach its potential. So again, like I said, if using odd fronts is what it takes, and I think that's what they should do.
Yeah, we'll see if Vic Fangio is able to continue to unlock Jalen Carter in today's game. All right, let us flip it over to our favorite zone, the fan zone, my favorite zone. We've got some questions for you over on Inquirer.com from you, and we'll start today with Ace Pilot. They say that a clean game from Hurts and a convincing win would be reassuring for sure. Anything less will raise doubts about the future. You have to consider, obviously, Jalen Hurts going into this game without two of his top receivers, without his starting right tackle. There's a lot working against Jalen Hurts, and Hurts has had, he was able to pull out a win last week, but he's still looking for a clean game, I would say, an all-around clean game. He has thrown 4 interceptions in his last 3 games, and he fumbled the ball last game. So there's a lot for him to clean up. What are you going to be looking for, in particular from Hurts in today's game when it comes to just operating without a few of his key players?
Yeah, I think the turnovers is the thing for Jalen Hurts at this point. I mean, it's just becoming more of a trend that I think the Eagles would be comfortable with. There's a little bit of like a dissonance here. Like we hear Nick Sirianni talk so much about the turnover battle, and then we see Jalen Hurts, at times not protecting the football. So I think, Nick has talked about how it's not sustainable for them to continue to win games without winning the turnover battle. I think, in this game without, the guys who can kind of make you right even when you're wrong in terms of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, those are guys who can make something out of nothing or, can kind of help, like I said, make up that gap if you do lose the turnover margin. I think that today it's going to be important that Jalen Hurts protects the football because I think that this Eagles team can beat the Bucs, but I think it's going to, I think it's obviously going to be an uphill battle if they're giving the ball away, if they lose that turnover differential once again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ace Pilot. Let's take this comment here from Skip Dog. They say a lot of young guys have to keep maturing quickly and produce this week. Going to be a tough road game again. Turnovers will decide a win or loss. EJ already hit on those turnovers. That's so true. And we've already discussed some of the young players, especially Jalen Carter being one who will continue to keep maturing in this defense, being the consistent player that the Eagles need him to be. Are there any other young players in particular that you're curious to watch in today's game?
Yeah, I would say that Johnny Wilson, I'm intrigued. I feel like he has had mostly like a blocking role on this team so far, but I mean, at some point they're going to need him in the passing game. I think that he's one that will stand out. I feel like this could be like a heavy personnel package game for the Eagles, where they can be in 12 and 13 personnel a lot. And if Johnny Wilson is in the game as like, let's say they're in 12 with Johnny Wilson as one of the 2 receivers, like that's still a pretty heavy formation, so I think he might have an interesting role today. I mean, again, he's going to be playing more. So yeah, I would say Johnny Wilson's somebody that, I feel like I was intrigued by him in the preseason and training camp. Hasn't really done a whole lot yet, but I think this will be an opportunity for him to do so.
Absolutely. It's funny. When he was coming out of Florida State and the Eagles drafted him, I think one of the big questions was, is this guy a wide receiver or is he a tight end? Not often that you see receivers of his size, and the Eagles were pretty adamant that he is a receiver. And we have seen him, obviously running routes, and he has a couple catches to this point. However, to your point, he has been used in a blocking role, which it doesn't matter if you can catch the ball in this Eagles offense. I think that they'll take whoever can contribute to this point, especially in the absence of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Let's take this question here as well. This comment from Rick VS. They say that the Eagles need to get the ball to Saquon Barkley and have Dallas be a blitz pressure release valve. If the defense can play well again this week, the Eagles may win in a squeaker. Right? We'll get into our predictions in a little bit, but again, like we've got the big absence of these 2 top receivers with Saquon Barkley at their disposal now and Dallas Goedert coming off of a really strong game, crazy game really against the Saints in terms of just how he was able to get involved in the passing game and have some really generate yards after the catch and have some really big receptions. When you look at what he could potentially do against the blitz in particular, just being able to get in on the passing game in terms of having more just like short to intermediate routes. How important is his presence going to be for Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, it's going to be majorly important, not only as a hot route option or the probably the key component to the passing game, also in the running game. I think he's going to be really important. That's one of the things that makes Dallas Goedert as valuable as he is that he is a plus in the running game as a blocker. I think that most teams, if they looked at this offensive, this group of offensive skill position guys, like the idea would be, have Saquon Barkley be the main, basically the main ingredient, have Dallas Goedert be, a factor in the run game, and then have play action off of it. I think that's kind of the key to success for this team, is being able to lean on Saquon Barkley when they need to, and then having Dallas Goedert, like I said, be like the major, the primary, passing option. So it's going to be important. I think he's going to be important, like I said, in both phases, both run and pass.
Absolutely. All right. We've discussed a lot of different players today, EJ, but we're going to make our player picks in today's game. Who are you most looking forward to and seeing how they fare against the Bucs?
So I'm going to give you a player that I will be watching both for alignment and also performance, and it's Quinyon Mitchell. I wonder if, considering the fact we talked earlier about Chris Godwin, the amount of time that he lines up in the slot, I wonder if Quinyon Mitchell is a candidate to bump inside on, and maybe in some key situations, just to account for Godwin being out there or being inside on the slot there. I mean, we saw Quinyon do it in training camp. They have outside corners to put, next to him, whether it's Isaiah Rodgers or Keely Ringo. I think that might be, a favorable option if Chris Godwin does start to give them trouble, from that inside alignment. I just think, when you think about the way that Avonte Maddox has played so far this season, I don't know if you feel great about that matchup going into the game. Quinyon Mitchell, by comparison, has had a really good season. He's looked really good in that outside role. Maybe you don't want to mess with him, but I do think, again, maybe if it's high leverage situations, third downs, red zone, if they put Chris Godwin in the slot, that they're probably going to target him in there. I think Quinyon Mitchell might be best served kind of bumping inside for some of those plays. So yeah, I'm going to be curious to see where he lines up.
That's a great point from you there, EJ. Not that all of your points are great. I think that's an interesting comment in particular, just because of what we did see in training camp. We know that there is somewhat of a foundation for that, with Quinyon Mitchell bumping inside and then seeing an Isaiah Rodgers, for example, on the outside opposite Darius Slay. Is that something that Vic Fangio would be willing to dip into for today's game? We will find out. Perhaps it is something that they would end up dipping into later in the game. We'll see exactly what happens. But I think that's a good pick for you. I am going to going kind of safe here with Saquon Barkley, and just in terms of how involved he's going to be today. He leads the league with 351 rushing yards to this point, and it doesn't seem like the Eagles are trying to back off of him anytime soon, and they really shouldn't in today's game against the Buccaneers. This Bucs run defense hasn't been great. I mean, the Bucs defense in general, I don't think has been all that great to start the season, but they're allowing 4.9 rushing yards per play, which ranks 5th most in the league. I think they got to just keep running it down their throats and seeing how he can really just add a little bit of juice to this offense in the absence of AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. They might even need him in the passing game too. So he's got to show that he has gotten rid of any sort of demons in the passing game after that big drop in week 2. So I'm definitely going to have my eyes, I'm sure a lot of people are, on Saquon Barkley today. All right, now it is time for our predictions. This is a tough one with all these injuries, but we're going to do our best to give you our rationale today. And for that, we will welcome in Jeff McLean to give his prediction. But before he gets into his prediction today, Jeff, I want to know, what matchup are you going to be keeping an eye on in today's game?
Yeah, so it looks like Vita Vea is going to be active. The Buccaneers nose tackle, defensive tackle. He did not play last week against the Broncos, and the Bucs, of course, got slaughtered in that game. I'm not saying it was specifically because of him, but obviously he's a key component for that on that defensive line for Todd Bowles' front there. And he's a big guy, so you're thinking, okay, run stuffer, and he does do that, but he's probably a better pass rusher. And I think that's where, where I'm focused mostly on, especially as it pertains to center Cam Jurgens. Obviously now starting in place of the retired Jason Kelce. He's gotten off to a solid start. Vea is a different kind of creature up the middle for him to have to defend versus some of the guys he's faced here in the first 3 weeks. And, Kelce historically had trouble against guys that were significantly larger than him. And Vea had a really good game against the Eagles in that playoff loss back in January. it wasn't just the Todd Bowles blitz packages that gave the Eagles issues. Vea was a big part of that as well. And if he's, anywhere close to 100%, he's going to have to be someone that Juergens and the Eagles are cognizant of. And, it's not just Juergens. He's going to line up over the guards, Landon Dickerson and Mekhi Becton. And if you look at both those guys, they each are wearing braces. Landon Dickerson on his left wrist, and Mekhi, because I think he said he tore ligaments in his left ring finger in that last game, wasn't able to come back. But he says with the brace he can play, he's good to go. But that's something I think we should pay attention to, is how these guys handle both those injuries, and certainly against a guy as strong as Vita Vea.
With all of that in mind, Jeff, who do you think is going to win today's game?
Yeah, I mean, I made my prediction on Friday when I thought there was a chance that A.J. Brown and Lane Johnson may play. They are not playing, as we now know. So that certainly, along with the loss of Devontae Smith, will impact this offense. But, as you guys have talked about already, it's not like this Buccaneers team is coming in extremely healthy as well. So they're missing some key players as well, and I think the Eagles can certainly exploit them there. And look, I get it. I mean, this is the scene of the crime last year, which ended the season, and the Eagles played terrible in that game. This is a different team. I don't know if they've kind of exorcised all the demons from the end of last season, and whether this year's team doesn't still have a lot of issues just because they performed well, specifically, obviously on the defensive side last week against the Saints. But, I think they're going to come out with a better game plan. I think they're going to be able to handle the blitzes, Todd Bowles' blitzes, a little better. And, I think that they're going to find ways to defensively disrupt Baker Mayfield based off what they did last week. And I just think with Vic Fangio getting more of a handle on his personnel and knowing what he has to do, specifically play a little bit less of Bryce Huff, for instance, to shut down this offense, which is also missing a third receiver. And look, Mike Evans is difficult, and Chris Godwin is going to be EJ. You talked about this in the slot, but I feel like this Eagles team can squeak out a win here, and I have them winning 26-20.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
That was a long explanation.
We appreciate the detail and the thought that goes into it. EJ, I want to hear the same from you. What is your final score prediction for today's game?
I feel like our audience has heard enough of me where I'm not going to be as eloquent as Jeff was. I'll be more brief. But I have the Eagles winning 24-21. I think the offense should be able to withstand the loss of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith reasonably well. I'm sure there'll be dry periods throughout the game. I'm sure there'll be moments where maybe it looks a little shaky, but I think they should be able to score enough to keep pace. And I really think the Eagles defense, I'm choosing to believe that they maybe found something against the Saints with those odd fronts. And as Jeff mentioned, a little bit less of Bryce Huff on early downs, not leaning on him as much. I think that they should be able to contain this Bucs offense. I'm not really sure what to make of this Bucs team either. So this was a hard one to predict. Bucs have had some weird results early in the season. Maybe the home field advantage, like Jeff mentioned, like the Eagles' struggles here in the past, that might, come into play more than maybe I'm accounting for here, but I feel reasonably confident that the Eagles can, come out of this game, go into the bye week 3-1. So yeah, I had the Eagles winning 24-21.
All right. I am following in trend with everybody else. I'm also picking the Eagles 27-24, a little bit closer than you had, Jeff, and similar to what you had, EJ, perhaps a little higher scoring, but again, small sample size with this Bucs team, but even at a more fully healthy capacity, they haven't exactly been extremely overwhelming in terms of just how kind of the team that we saw toward the end of last season, or at least that the Eagles saw. Particularly, I think offensively, I feel like Baker Mayfield has been okay. The offensive line in front of him hasn't been so great. It's getting sacked a lot. He's been sacked 13 times this season, which is tied for the third most in the league right now. So this could potentially be, again, if the Eagles defensive line can have a similar performance to what they had last week against the Saints, I think this could be a productive day for them. But they really need to do a good job at getting at Mayfield, getting at Mayfield and getting him down, and not just getting pressure on him, because he is a good quarterback playing against pressure too. So I'm picking the Eagles. We'll we'll see how this all unfolds. This is going to be a really interesting wild card rematch, and it's not necessarily the wild card rematch that the Eagles would have envisioned going into today's game. All right, everybody, that is going to do it for us for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning into Inquirer Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. Just as a reminder, you can continue to be a part of our conversation throughout the game. Head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. I will be in there chatting with you all, answering your questions, picking your brains, whatever you want to call it, throughout the game in real time. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you all over there.
And please keep up with more Eagles coverage on my Uncovering the Birds podcast. New episodes released every week. Listen to wherever you get your podcasts or go to inquirer.com/podcast.
For today, everyone, thanks again for tuning into Gameday Central.